Wow. Sheena Ren, a fourth-year university student, is enjoying a short break before starting his job search. He's loved swords and magic since he was a child, and is willing to stay up all night just to finish a story with such a theme. He has just finished playing the newly released game, titled The Legend of the Seven Heroes, Part 2 in the popular RPG series. This is the familiar story of the children of the heroes who once defeated the Demon King. In Part 2, the protagonist's best friend kills another friend, a saint, and this unexpected act causes chaos in the kingdom. The king orders the protagonist to kill that friend. The story will continue in Part 3. Ren read the ending of the game, checking to see if anyone else had finished. He discovered that the protagonist's friend was actually the mastermind from beginning to end. He didn't really mind anyway, just thinking about playing again to discover some hidden skill. But before he could restart, a notification appeared, asking if he wanted to begin a special story with the ability to summon a demonic sword. Ren couldn't remember which character had that skill. But he didn't care. He pressed yes. And then he was stunned when he was surrounded by blinding light. When he woke up, he saw the face of a strange, elderly woman. The woman is talking to another woman. Ren realized he had transmigrated into the game and become one of its characters. At first, he couldn't believe it. But the fact that his body couldn't move or see clearly proved that he was now an infant. Could this be the specific story that the game was referring to? Before he could think any further, the older woman picked him up and asked the person he guessed was his mother about his name. The young woman picked him up, smiled, and said she would name him Len Ashton. Ren burst into tears. That name he could never forget. It was the reason behind all the chaos in the game. Len Ashton, the protagonist's former best friend, betrayed him. Ren couldn't believe that he would now have to live under the name of one of the suspected masterminds behind everything in the game. Although his name and Len Ashton sound very similar, Ren didn't believe he had anything in common with that character. Time flies by. 7 years have passed since he transmigrated. Ren, now Len Ashton, is busy practicing swordsmanship with his father. The older man quickly threw the boy to the ground. His father warned him not to reveal any weaknesses to the enemy. Even though he was lying flat on the ground, Len was still praised by his father for his agility, especially for a 7-year-old child. Even so, young Len was almost completely exhausted after the training session. It was springtime in their small village. An unnamed village in the Leomel Empire, a militaristic nation located in the western part of the Elfin continent, was bathed in a warm atmosphere. Looking back, Len still finds it hard to accept what happened to him, especially the prospect of having to start over as a newborn baby. But it was precisely because he was reborn in this way that he easily adapted, comfortably immersing himself in eating and sleeping whenever his mother sang him to sleep. What nobody knows? Len not only retained his memories, and he even has the ability to see everyone's status screen. However, he couldn't see his own status screen, unlike in the game. However, what concerned him most was the skill of summoning demonic swords. It's true that the game has some hidden skills, and even on the second turn, players can combine some existing skills to create a new one. Of course, there are also unique skills available only to a select few. But as far as he could remember, there was absolutely no skill called summoning a demonic sword. In your case, Len can actually summon the magic sword, even though it's still quite small at the moment. According to the inscription on his bracelet, his ability to summon a demonic sword will develop as he matures. Additionally, he will be able to use minor natural magic attacks. This skill also allows him to increase the number of types of magic swords he can summon. He now possesses a magic sword with wood attributes. However, Len also had to train his magic carefully. If he trained too much, he would deplete his magical energy and suffer from severe headaches. Len had been secretly practicing his demon sword summoning skills alone, just like now, until his father suddenly burst into the room to hug him. The fact that he possesses this power only further confirms that this world is intimately connected to the game. That also means he has to do everything he can to avoid the bleak future he knows he'll face. That's why Len decided to start practicing magic at an early age. He did it both to protect himself and to learn more about this world. Len lived a peaceful life, helping his parents on their small farm. When he was 7 years old, his father suggested he begin practicing swordsmanship with a wooden sword. During the first training session, Len was the one who struck first, but his father easily dismissed the idea. Even though he was still just a child, Len was surprised to realize his current body. He possesses incredible strength. However, that strength was still not enough for him to defeat his father. Len only lasted less than 10 minutes in the match. Nevertheless, his father praised him and said they would continue when he regained his strength. As soon as his father passed away, Len checked his notifications, and he found that his skills had improved thanks to using a wood attribute magic sword. From then on, he continued his daily routine, studying theory in the morning and practicing swordsmanship in the afternoon. Unlike in the game, Len cannot easily level up by collecting magic stones from flying monsters. His father had given him a magic stone when he was a child. But since he didn't hunt it himself, his skills and status notifications didn't react at all. They continued training, and so another month passed. Len's father noticed that the boy had improved a lot in a short period of time, but he also pointed out that you need to improve your balance. Then his father threw him to the ground to illustrate his point. Although he wanted to practice more, his father advised him to rest and reminded him that just consistent effort each day will be enough. He smiled, said that Len would do very well, and left. As soon as my father left, Len immediately checked his status. He realized that his demon sword summoning skill was only a little bit away from leveling up. Unlike in games, leveling up in this world is much harder. His skills only increased by about 2 points each day. Despite being tired, Len began to enjoy life, because things are getting more and more interesting. That night, Len's mother commented on the blisters and calluses on his hands. She said that perhaps Len's father was putting too much pressure on him. Len reassured his mother that he wanted to do it, then asked her if she hated swords. She replied that she was afraid of swords, and she recalled the last time her husband was fascinated by swordsmanship. When he was young, he not only protected her from many monsters, but she couldn't help but worry whether his courage might become a curse. What if he were injured because of it? Just thinking about it made her uneasy, but she also understood that his power was no joke. Len continued to hunt many monsters, bringing in a steady income. The monster meat could also be shared with the villagers, benefiting everyone. At that moment, Len's father came in and reassured his mother not to worry because he was very strong. He promised not to let the monster defeat him in the village, and unlike before, he was no longer so careless. He said that family is his top priority. When Len lay down in bed that night, he couldn't help but think about his family. In his previous life, his parents divorced. He lives with his mother. As time went on, their conversations became shorter and shorter, until finally they stopped speaking to each other altogether. His mother never came home either. Len felt grateful that she was able to go to university, and he tried to understand that his mother had also gone through her own difficulties during that time. When 3 people lived together, everything was very peaceful, with Len doing the housework and practice daily. Compared to my previous life, Len's current life is completely different, but he feels fulfilled. One day after training, Len lost to his father again in the match. His father suggested they rest and continue tomorrow. When I stood up, Len sensed something was different. His body suddenly felt light, and he quickly assumed a fighting stance. He rushed towards his father. The father managed to stop him in time, but he was surprised and couldn't understand how Len was so fast. Not only that, his strength has also increased significantly compared to before. Len continued to attack his father. He realized that his speed and strength were increasing, leaving his father with no choice but to defend himself against his blows. Len will probably continue, if it weren't for the father's broken sword. Finally, the father realized what was happening. He hugged Len close and realized that, "My son is a skilled person." Then his mother, Milieu, walked in and curiously asked what was going on. And it was then that his father explained it to her. Len also realized that the next level of his physical abilities had been activated. But more importantly, his father was now even more determined to take him to the capital to make a name for himself as a knight. His parents are now very excited about this new discovery, and even want to go to church to test his skills if they have enough money. Len wasn't very enthusiastic about the idea, saying that as long as his skill didn't kill him, it didn't matter what his skill was. When they heard him say that, his parents could only frown at him. Surely children are usually thrilled to discover a new skill like that. But Len remained adamant about not wanting to go through this. Who would have ever heard of the skill of summoning a demonic sword? He'd rather stay away from such trouble. And if possible, he would just like to live a peaceful life in the village. If there's one thing Len wants to do, it's to become his father's successor in the village. So they can hunt monsters together. If their income increases, they can help the village prosper. Not only that, if the situation worsens, Len can also protect his father. This surprised his mother greatly. For the past 7 years, Len has lived the happiest life he's ever had. And it was all thanks to his parents. Deep down, Len knew he was no longer living as Sheena Wren. But now it's Len Ashton. That's why he wants his parents to live a long life together. Both his parents were touched by his words and ended the conversation with a hug. For Len, this was his second time playing. Therefore, he resolved to cherish everything in order to prevent a future filled with despair. You will live a different life than Len in the game. But he never expected that his dream would be shattered. In the next few years, because in the future he will meet the girl he should never have met, the very girl he was supposed to kill. In the northern city of Clausel, a beautiful young woman sat alone in the garden, sighing heavily. Vios, the leader of the night patrol team, approached her and asked if anything was wrong. The girl replied that she felt bored with practicing. The old knight's eyes rested on the men who had fallen before him. The old knight remarked that even his soldiers were no longer enough to serve as sparring partners for her. At this point, the girl realized something more important that Vios had done. Because she noticed the armor he was wearing, he replied that he had been ordered to patrol the northwestern part of the territory, and he needed to eliminate a troublesome monster. Back in Len's village, life was as peaceful as ever. Len realized that 3 years had passed since he leveled up, as he had now reached level 2. Now, Len can see the benefits of level 3, but the next level is still a long way off. Especially since he only has 659 points, while he needs 15 more points to level up. The truth is, there were days when he couldn't practice swordsmanship because he had to help in the fields, especially as winter approached. He had only just discovered that practicing for a short period of time would slightly reduce his score, but with his current score, it's enough to give him the strength to fight and live peacefully in his small village. One of the village elders greeted Len, speaking of how his father always boasted about him, and that he would one day become one of the great knights of the capital. Speaking of the capital, a group of knights suddenly appeared. The elderly woman told Len they should go home. These knights belonged to Lord Baron's men. They headed straight to Ashton's house, where Vios had spoken with his father holding a letter in his hand. The Vios apologized for the unexpected appearance, and Len's father asked what they were doing in the suburbs. Len knew that the Lord was the ruler of their territory, and all knights had to report to higher-ranking nobles. His father was one of the knights assigned to protect the village. Throughout his time in this world, this was the first time Len had seen a knight in armor. Len's father read the letter with a frown, asking Vios if the monster had actually caused any damage in the area. The elderly knight confirmed, adding that several villages had been attacked and there were casualties according to witnesses. The monster was a small creature that moved as fast as the wind. Therefore, Vios and his team patrolled the area, looking for opportunities to eliminate the monster. However, they had not yet had any luck. Vios suggested that Len's father join the vigilance team. Father Len only asked what rank this monster belonged to. Vios is speculated to be at least a D segment car. In terms of ranking, the organization created a monster ranking system based on their level of danger, with S being the highest rank and G being the lowest. If the monster lurking around the village is a D rank monster, then it's equivalent to a boss in the early stages of the game. Despite the large number of knights, the monster remained undefeated. But back to the main point, Len's father asked why such a mid-level monster was appearing in this area when only F-level monsters usually appeared in their territory. Vios didn't know the reason either, so they planned to recruit some more knights from a nearby village to enhance security. However, because the patrol area is so vast, it will take approximately 20 days for reinforcements to arrive. The elderly knight apologized for the inconvenience, and he asked Len's father to patiently wait until then. Given the current situation, Len's father had no choice but to accept the assignment. While they were busy discussing, Len listened attentively and wondered what the monster's name was. If he knew its name, perhaps he would have some understanding of it, based on his memories from the game. Vios and Len's father finally finished their conversation. Upon noticing Len's question, Vios confirmed that he was indeed his son. Len's father immediately told him to greet the captain of the knights. Vios and his team stayed a short while, enjoying the Ashton family's hospitality before departing that day. As the knights left, they couldn't help but comment on how the 10-year-old boy Len was the same age as their young mistress, and they were also very curious about him because Len possessed exceptional skills. If it were Vios, he would have wanted to test Len's swordsmanship right there at Ashton's house. Len's father said they would be busy from now on. But when Len wanted to see the letter from Vios, his father told him not to worry. He would hunt the D-class monster himself. Actually, he had hunted it a year before, even before Len was born. Len was surprised to hear that, but it also explained why he always lost to his father in fencing practice. Since then, Father Len never stopped hunting. He brought back a large haul of wild boars. He planned to increase the number he hunted each day because wild boars were a popular hunting target, even among other monsters. Len understood his father's plan. The father wanted to reduce the number of prey animals so that wild monsters wouldn't come near their area, and this would also make it easier for the soldiers to track the monsters thanks to the fewer footprints and animal droppings. Len's father continued hunting, but unlike before when he only hunted in the mornings, he now begins hunting in the late afternoon, until sunset. One night, while they were bathing together, Len noticed bruises on his father's body. He said that perhaps his father had been working too hard. Len asked his father if he could help him hunt, but his father said he could do so after the matter with the monster was resolved. Len's father also apologized for not being able to train with him, but Len didn't mind because he was busy helping his mother take care of the wild boars his father had hunted. Although his father seemed calm about it, Len couldn't help but worry, as he didn't want anything to happen that would disrupt his peaceful life. Life goes on as usual until the 10th day, when something else happened. Len realized that his father hadn't returned yet, so his mother suggested going to find him. Len offered to go along, but his mother objected, saying it was too dangerous. Hearing this, Len couldn't restrain himself and spoke up, pointing out that it would be more dangerous for his mother to go alone, and that he would go no matter how much she tried to stop him. Seeing her mother's frightened expression, Len recalled a conversation from a few years ago about her mother's worries regarding her father's safety. Finally, the mother and daughter decided to set off to find their father. They walked on until they reached the bridge leading into the forest. A river separates the forest from their village. As they began to cross the bridge, Len felt his eyes gradually adjust to the darkness, and not long after they discovered their father sitting by the tree near the other end of the bridge. They were overjoyed to see him. But I also felt something was wrong. Len's mother rushed to his side. Len had no choice but to follow behind. And that's when they saw Len's father, severely injured. He was bleeding profusely. The bright moonlight shone all around. Len and his mother were worried and taking care of his father. Suddenly he heard a noise nearby. This made him turn around and look. Suddenly a wild boar appeared out of nowhere. The wild boar charged straight towards Len. He managed to stop the wild boar in time with his sword, and he struggled with the beast that was pinning him down until his mother hit the pig. Just then, Len saw movement from behind. 2 other wild boars were approaching them. Len was surprised to discover that he could repel them. They realized that it was a result of the promotion. He quickly pushed the pig away, and he lunged toward the 3rd child when the 3rd wild boar aimed straight at his mother. Len slashed the wild boar with his sword, and he was surprised that it was destroyed with just 1 slash. When he slaughtered the remaining pig, the 3rd animal stopped attacking, but the wild boar ran away. All Len could think of. I was stronger by then, thanks to all the training sessions with my father. Len and his mother hurried their father home, spending the entire night with Mrs. Rigg treating his wounds. The old woman told them that Len's father was still in an unstable condition, but at least his injuries were temporarily under control. His mother thanked both of them, especially Len. He insisted on going out with her last night. As for Len, he still couldn't stop thinking, because it was impossible for his father to be defeated by those weak wild boars. This means that his father encountered a dangerous monster, which he didn't want. If so, the monster is still in the forest, and it will take another 10 days for reinforcements to arrive. Len couldn't help but think about the worst-case scenario. The monster invaded the village and attacked them. With that in mind, he began to look for ways he could do to help. Len immediately decided to return to the forest. He saw the monsters he had killed last night. Luckily, they weren't eaten by other animals, so Len thought maybe he should bring them home before the others arrived. Suddenly, torch-like lights shot out from the corpses of the monsters, and the torch-like lights were drawn into his bracelet. It increases the monster summoning skill, and get the wooden monster 2 points. This confirms Len's initial thought. The bracelet only absorbs the monster stones from the monster's body if you are the one hunting them. Len brought the wild boar's carcass home with plans for that night. He told his mother that he would take over his father's job of protecting the village. Before his mother could even speak, Len had said beforehand that he understood the danger. But as long as you're a member of the Ashton family, protecting the village is also your responsibility. His mother objected, saying he was still a child. But Len replied that he was the only one in the village who could fight against the monster when his father was injured. That's why he asked his mother for permission to protect everyone, at least until reinforcements arrive. His mother understood that there was no arguing with Len. So that night, she stayed up late sitting beside his father. The next morning, she agreed to let Len go, but on the condition that he return before dark. If you get lost, his mother told him to use Sarugi Rock, a large tower-like rock in the forest, as a landmark. Following my mother's instructions, Len has found Sarugi Rock. and recall the power of the wooden sword and its natural magical properties. He recalled a powerful boss in the game that could use natural magic. As if sensing Len's intention, he was immediately put to the test to demonstrate that ability. A wild boar suddenly appeared, and the wild boar charged straight toward him. Len calmly pointed his sword at the monster. He recited a spell that enveloped the pig in magic. Then vines wrapped around it, leaving it hanging suspended in midair. However, witnessing the monster struggling, this made it impossible for Len to defeat it immediately. Finally, he decided to end the battle with a fatal blow, finishing off the pig. Len couldn't believe that natural magic was so easy to use, and he was able to practice a lot that day by taking down an entire herd of wild boars. The villagers were very surprised to see him, young Len dragging his spoils, which included 12 pigs. The next day, he hunted down 12 more. And by the third day, the number of wild boars he had hunted had increased. The same was true on Wednesday and Thursday. The number of hunted animals increased each day. However, he still hadn't encountered the monster he was looking for. Looking at his notification, Len realized he only needed to hunt 3 more pigs. He was more excited than ever that he would be able to upgrade his demon sword of metal skills soon. That evening, Len returned home, and he saw that Mrs. Rigg was worried. She asked his mother to wait outside. Because Len's father was in a bad state, Len rushed to Rigg's side and asked what had happened. She explained that his father's condition had worsened at dusk. What's worse is that they used up all the precious herbs they had, leaving him with only a faint breath of life. They couldn't understand why this happened, and tonight is the last time. Herbal remedies can be used. At that time, Mrs. Rigg asked Milieu to bring the recipe box to her house, telling her to ask her husband about how to help. Milieu hurried outside. Len then asked Mrs. Rigg if there was anything he could do and about herbs. With a sorrowful expression, Mrs. Rigg explained that these herbs used to grow around the foot of Mount Tsurugi, but they became extinct after the harsh winter a few decades ago. Len saw a 5-pointed leaf on the table. He asked if it was herbal medicine, and Mrs. Rigg confirmed it and told him to wait outside the door because she needed to take care of his father. Len stepped outside and realized, that's rondo grass, one of the medicinal herbs he used in the game. But has this herb truly become extinct? Len couldn't believe his eyes until he saw it with his own. He knew very well that the forest was very dangerous at night. But if you don't do anything now, your father will die. Finally, Len dashed into the forest, ignoring all the strange shadows, run straight towards Tsurugi Rock. Upon arrival, he immediately searched for rondo grass around him. But I couldn't find it. Len didn't give up, wondering if there was still grass at the top. He began climbing to the mountaintop, thanks to the magic of nature. After a long time, he finally reached the summit, and before him lay a field of rondo grass. Len hurriedly pulled up as many leaves as he could, stuffing them into a bag in the hope that these herbs would save his father. Just then he spotted bones on the ground, wild boar bones. He wondered how they got there, so high up. But looking closely, he realized there weren't just pig bones, but also some pieces of jewelry. It sent shivers down his spine. Len quickly rushed down, feeling uneasy about the place. He started running home, but suddenly they encountered 3 wild boars. Even the monsters were startled by his appearance, but Len quickly eliminated them in just 3 sword strokes. At that moment, he realized something was wrong. The wild boars seemed afraid of something, as if they were trying to run away. Len sensed a presence behind him, and when he turned around to look, he saw the familiar silhouette of the monster, which he wanted to avoid. That's a special D-class monster, Chief Wolven. The colossal monster rose above everything, letting out a deafening roar. Chief Wolven was a powerful monster, ranking at the top of the D-class monsters. Instead of waiting for it to attack, Len decided to run away. He turned around just in time to avoid the monster's jaws. Len landed on a nearby tree trunk, but even the monster quickly sank its teeth into it. Len only managed to dodge the bite from its breath. He admitted to himself that this wolf was much more agile than him, but that wasn't the worst part. Chief Wolven was also known for his ability to use wind magic, thanks to his multiple tails. The monster attacked Len using wind magic. Fortunately, Len's quick reflexes saved him by a hair's breadth. Chief Wolven uses the wind energy accumulated from his body to create invisible hands, using them to steal objects. In addition to the wind magic attack just now, Len knew perfectly well that this monster was far too powerful for him to handle. However, he also realized that it would never let him escape. At this point, his only option was to find a way to take it down right here. Currently, the offensive power of his natural magic is low, and there's no way for him to get close enough to the monster's belly to inflict damage. But then he noticed a wound on one of the monster's 4 legs. Len suddenly realized that this wound might have been inflicted by his father. This also explains why his father was able to escape the monster the last time. He thought that perhaps the reason the monster hadn't attacked him yet was because it was still injured. Len's father had fulfilled his role as a knight, and Len was determined to follow through. Suddenly, the atmosphere became stifling when Chief Wolven unleashed a new wind attack. Len, stay calm. And he used natural magic to block the attack. It created a buffer zone between him and the monster. He also uses magic to restrain the monster, even if only for a brief moment, before he charged straight into it and delivered a direct blow to Chief Wolven. Unfortunately, his wooden demon sword shattered. Instead of inflicting damage on the monster, this is terrible. Will he have enough time to summon the sword back? Len stepped back and tried to summon the sword. But as soon as I did that, he felt a terrible headache. Summoning the sword was consuming too much mana, or perhaps it was because he was trying to summon it, even though the sword was broken. This moment of confusion was the opportunity Chief Wolven needed. The monster immediately pounced on Len, sinking its teeth into him. Nevertheless, Len took advantage of the opportunity. He struck the monster's wound as it lunged at him. This caused it to throw him off, sending him crashing into a nearby tree. Angered, Len uses natural magic to create a fragile shield between himself and the monster. Len constructed a cave from tree trunks and vines, the place where the monster relentlessly gnaws away. Inside the cave, Len examined his wounds and realized he could faint at any moment because they were so severe. Just then, he remembered he still had rondo grass with him. But the image of his father came to mind. This led him to decide against using it, fearing it wouldn't be enough to save his father. When Chief Wolven approached, Len wondered if there were any other weapons that could be used against it. It was then that he saw his bracelet. Meanwhile, the monster had grown utterly bored with trying to bite its way into the cave. It decided to use a wind attack. The strong winds forced Len to leave the cave, but he quickly regained his balance and ran towards Tsurugi Rock. Consider it a signpost. Chief Wolven was preparing to chase after him, but Len used his natural magic to restrain the monster a little. With mana nearly depleted, Len hurried over to the carcasses of the 3 wild boars he had hunted earlier. He remembered that he only needed 3 more to unlock the magical metal sword. Chief Wolven managed to break through the vines, and Chief Wolven chased after Len. In a last-ditch effort to stop the monster, Len threw his broken sword at it. The monster easily dodged. But as soon as it did so, vines unexpectedly shot up from the sword. Wrap Chief Wolven up tightly once more. Len hastily absorbed the monster stones from the wild boars. Determined not to lose, with one last effort, Len summoned the magical metal sword. Just in time, as Chief Wolven was about to bite him in the head, Len plunged his sword into the monster's head. Launch an attack, pierced through Chief Wolven's skull. The monster collapsed to the ground, covered in blood, and died instantly. Len finally got to admire the new sword he had summoned, the magical metal sword. However, immediately after the victory, Len felt exhausted. He slipped and fell right next to the monster's corpse, when his bracelet began to absorb the monster stone. Despite winning, Len knew he was in a dangerous situation when his body could no longer move. He clutched the bag tightly to his chest, thinking about his mother and father. Len could barely hear the sound of the horse's hooves and shouts from afar when a group of people appeared from the horizon. Before losing consciousness, he realized that reinforcements had arrived just in time. They took Len home. They knocked on Ashton's door and introduced themselves as knights from Colossal. One of them was carrying Len in his arms, while the other person gave it to his mother. The bag contains rondo grass. Meanwhile, at Closet, one of the knights reported to Vios that Len Ashton had single-handedly defeated Chief Wolven. This was overheard by a young girl. She was extremely excited to learn that a young boy in their territory single-handedly defeated a D-rank monster. 2 months later, Len has fully recovered and is spending his time leisurely atop Tsurugi Rock in the forest. He was admiring Bandit's magical sword, which looked more like a pair of finger guards than a sword. To be honest, Len didn't expect to receive a new magical sword after defeating Chief Wolven. He put it away and went downstairs. Just then, a knight was waiting at the foot of the mountain. He anxiously reminded Len that he should inform them whenever he wanted to enter the forest so they could escort him. On the way home, Len thanked them for arriving in time. The knight was pleased to hear this, making the rush worthwhile. However, they were still surprised that Len had been able to defeat the monster alone. At this point, the knight, out of curiosity, asked if Len's bag contained the treasure that Chief Wolven had hidden, and Len confirmed it. Len told him that he wanted to sell the treasure to raise money to help the village. The knight said that the reward for the spoils was tax-free, plus the materials from the monster were very valuable. Therefore, the lord was buying them at a slightly higher price, enough for the village to develop over the next few decades. When Len got home, his father praised him for doing a great job. but Len quickly explained that it was thanks to his father that he was able to defeat Chief Wolven. His father asked what he wanted as a reward. Len then pointed to the beautiful gem the old man was holding. In fact, he knew it was the Salasha Pearl, an extremely rare treasure. Besides the gem, Len also pretended that the bracelet was among the treasure and asked to keep it so he could wear it publicly from now on. After receiving the reward, his father praised him again because he protected him and the entire village. Peaceful life returned to the village until one day Len came home and he saw a strange girl. The girl was standing leaning against the brick wall. When she saw Len, the girl immediately asked, "Are you Len Ashton?" Len nodded in confirmation, even though he had never met her before. But for some reason, he had a feeling of familiarity. Len had no idea that this moment was destined to happen, a meeting he had always tried to avoid. The girl jumped down from the wall, looking pleased that she had found the right person. Then she drew out 2 small swords. The girl threw the remaining sword towards Len, and she asked if his wounds were all right. Len, flustered, put his sword down and replied that his wound had completely healed. He asked how she knew about him, but instead of answering, she simply said, "We should begin." Surprise! She charged straight forward with the sword in her hand. Len managed to block the attack just in time. But the girl didn't stop. Her punches came from a variety of different directions. However, she seemed quite pleased to see that Len was able to cope despite starting slower. Len helped her up while asking why they had to do this, secretly admiring her skills in his heart. However, she simply replied calmly, "The sword has been sharpened, don't worry." The two continued to duel with swords. The girl was always on the offensive while Len had to defend carefully. To avoid accidentally injuring either of them, Len decided to end the match. He unexpectedly changed tactics. He caught the girl off guard and pulled them both to the ground, with him lying on top of her. "Okay, you win," Len said breathlessly, but the girl suddenly panicked. The girl told him to move aside. Len quickly stepped back when the girl stood up and said they should continue fighting, because she has never admitted defeat. But before they could even begin, the guards appeared and shouted, "Princess!" She was startled to see the Vios approaching. Finally, she set her sword aside and curtsied, and she presented a letter addressed to the Ashton family. She said she was there on behalf of her father. According to her, her father held the Ashton family in high regard for having defeated Chief Wolven. She introduced herself as Lisha Colossal, the Holy Maiden of White Light. Wait, did she just say Lisha Colossal? The guards beside her noisily complained about why she was traveling without an escort. The princess retorted irritably that they had wasted too much time returning. Len still couldn't believe it. The girl standing before him was the one he was supposed to eliminate in the game. Why is she here? The whole group returned to the Ashton mansion. This is where the princess finally met Len's father. Then only Lisha and Len remained. Len was confused as he thought about this strange turn of events. In the game, Lisha Colossal, the White Light saintess, never joined the protagonist's team. Even so, her power is still formidable, even surpassing the protagonist if she doesn't put in the effort to level up. In terms of personality and qualities, she is also one of the most popular characters in the game. However, Lisha could not become a romantic object, and was not called an unconquerable heroine. Back in the present, Lisha asked Len if he plans to visit the capital. She admitted that she came here purely out of curiosity, wanting to see firsthand the skills of the young man who had defeated Chief Wolven. Based on their recent fight, she confirmed that Len is not only strong, but also very brave. She also expressed admiration for how quickly Len was able to adapt to swordsmanship, despite her sudden request for him to fight. In the end, Len could only sigh at this bizarre situation. He had heard from the captain of the guard that the village was located on Colossal's border, and it would take more than 10 days of horseback riding to reach the capital. Len thought that as long as he stayed hiding in this village, he would never meet the feudal lord's daughter. But she didn't expect Lisha to come all the way here, just to meet him for a duel. He frankly told her she had overestimated her skills. He pointed out that his father had defeated the monster before, so his victory over Chief Wolven wasn't entirely his own doing. Furthermore, Len also said that he didn't know any techniques, so he didn't believe he had the courage she thought he did. She scoffed, not believing a word he said. His continued humility only proved that Len was different from the other nobles. These are people who brag as if they've had the chance to kill a monster. That's why she wanted him to come back to the city with her, so they could duel anytime. Len realized that she really enjoyed swordsmanship after the recent match. He knew Lisha was a hard worker, but he still wanted to keep as much distance as possible, so he frankly told her that he had no intention of leaving the village. Upon hearing this, Lisha assumed that Len didn't like her, because he had tried his best to stay away from her all this time. Len replied that wasn't the reason, because if he left the village, his father would be the only one who could deal with the monster and everything else. If a monster like Chief Wolven appeared, the entire village would surely be wiped out. Moreover, he enjoyed life in the village and never considered living in the city. Lisha nodded and said nothing more, but inwardly she refused to give up and would wait for another opportunity. That evening, Lisha had dinner with the Ashton family. After the meal, Len went to the stables to check on the horses. When a sword fell at his feet, he knew exactly who it was and turned to ask Lisha if this sparring session was their post-meal exercise. Lisha was glad he'd received the message, which made her feel much better. Moreover, she had his parents' consent, so everything was fine. He was about to pick up the sword, but then decided against it. As if she could read his mind, Lisha threatened to extend his stay if he didn't pick up his sword. This made Len pretend to be happy as he picked up the sword. But seeing him do that only made Lisha more curious about why he was so adamantly rejecting her. There must be a good reason, right? Whatever the reason, Lisha decided she would defeat him to find out. Len replied, "What if I win?" But she simply said she would visit him again. Either way, it was a win-win situation for her. She rushed towards him. She swung her sword and struck. The wool is easily avoided. Lisha continued her attack with a series of slashes. However, she was surprised to see him easily parry the blows even while he was in a defensive stance. Len ignored her question, and he asked why Lisha was so focused on defeating him. Lisha pointed out that she hates losing. She proudly calls herself Saintess of White, and she didn't like losing to boys her age. Len felt confused and asked her what being a saintess had to do with that. As the duel continued, she explained that it was precisely because she was a saintess that her skills were blessed with superior physical abilities and mastery of swordsmanship. Furthermore, she can also use secret magic, so with all these advantages, if she is defeated, she will feel very frustrated. Lisha started to get more serious and attacked Len. Compared to before, even Len noticed that she had become much faster and stronger. It must be the effect of the holy magic. If you remember the word for game correctly, holy magic is linked to the power of white magic, possessing healing abilities. Holy magic, on the other hand, has the power to counteract undead curses and detoxify. Len finally counterattacked. But Lisha easily dodged, attacking him repeatedly with a spinning move. Len could only defend himself as she continued to attack. This time he asked why she didn't use all of her attacks. She replied that the Knight's Guard captain would be angry if she used it without permission. Len was now familiar with her movements, so when she lunged at him with her sword, he simply stepped aside and pointed his sword at her neck. He admitted she was very strong, but no match for Chief Wolven. He quickly tightened his grip on her arm, holding her back. Lisha was surprised. She tried to fight back. She quickly regained her balance and continued the attack. Len used her motivation again. To turn her around, he pushed her down and continued to point his sword at her neck. When Lisha was lying on the ground, Len ultimately won. This time her eyes lit up because of what he had just done. But then she realized it and stepped back. She still refused to admit defeat. Until you hear applause, that's enough. The Knight's Guard captain applauded Len for his skill in defeating Lisha and her holy magic despite his young age. Now he understood why Len was able to defeat Chief Wolven alone. Besides being trained by his father, Roy, Len must have trained very hard to become so strong. The older man turned to the young girl. She must now realize Len's power, so that would be enough for her to return home, enthusiastically continuing her training. Lisha shyly admitted it, then moved closer to Len. She apologized for bothering him and thanked him at the same time. Then she turned and walked away, leaving the two men behind. Vios was the first to speak up, apologizing on behalf of Lisha and promising to speak well of Len and his family to the Count. He further explained that none of his subordinates could compare to Lisha anymore, so she had become more complacent. However, he believed this experience would be a valuable lesson for the princess. If it were a Vios, he would prefer to extend his stay for a few more days so they could continue their sparring a bit more. However, despite his wishes, the old man told Len that they had to leave by tomorrow morning. In any case, it was Lisha who chose to go to the village and ask her father's permission to carry out certain tasks. This was the first time Len had heard of this, which surprised him a little. Vios went on to explain that Lisha was acting on behalf of the Count, trying to diffuse the unrest caused by the recent incident. Len knew Lisha was a person of outstanding character, but to actually represent her father at such a young age was truly impressive. Ultimately, he believed she was a good girl on the inside, although she's a bit mischievous. But after all that, he still wondered how the story ended with him killing her in the game. Anyway, he couldn't possibly know, because the storylines of the characters in the game haven't been explored. The next morning arrived quickly, and Lisha couldn't get a wink of sleep. She couldn't let things end like that, so she decided to write a letter to Len. After she finished, she let Vios read it first. She said she wanted to give him the letter before leaving to express her gratitude to the Ashton family. She thought it would be better to convey the invitation through a letter. However, the older man couldn't help but speak frankly. It was like a love letter. Lisha was astonished. When the Vios points out parts of the letter, it's like the confession of a young girl deeply in love. He listed many more details that hinted at this, and even Lisha had to admit it. She felt embarrassed by this realization. She decided to put the letter away and planned to throw it away as soon as they left the village. And so, Lisha and her troops left Ashton's house. She rode a horse. A sudden strong gust of wind blew her letter away, something she didn't realize at the time. Meanwhile, Len returned to Tsurugi. Len tried to test Bandit's demon sword. He pointed his finger towards a bird flying nearby. Despite the considerable distance, he was still able to grab a feather, demonstrating the sword's skill. At that moment, he noticed two birds on a nearby branch fighting over a piece of paper. He decided to grab it right away. That's the letter Lisha wrote. And as Len glanced over, he merely frowned when he realized it was a love letter. Len continued reading the letter. He wondered who had invited him to Clausel. He noticed the letter was made of high-quality parchment, and he thought it might be a letter from Lisha. But why here at this time? Just then he heard the sound of horse hooves, and he saw a group of knights approaching. Although they were not members of Clausel's group, Len quickly recognized their flag. The flag bore a different symbol than Clausel's. This means that this group of knights must have come from a different territory. They stopped and surrounded Len. They asked if he was one of the people under the rule of the Ashton family. Len replied that he was one of Ashton's men and asked who the knight was. Finally, the older man took off his helmet and explained that he was carrying a letter from Viscount Givens, addressed to the Ashton family. Len remembers this name. He knew that their territory lay northeast of where they were standing and had no connection to the Ashton family. However, since they were of a higher rank than the Count, Len had no choice but to lead them to his house. Soon after, that same night, this person met Len's father. Upon arriving and delivering the letter to him, the man immediately left, telling Len that he also had a letter for him from the Viscount, with an invitation for Len to join under his command. It seems that news of Len's victory over Chief Wolven reached the Viscount, who was very impressed with what Len had accomplished. Before they could respond, one of the Count's remaining knights stepped between them and told the Viscount's messenger that the Count had sent an invitation to Len. The Viscount's knights countered that a simple invitation from the Clausel family did not mean Len had accepted, so they saw no problem approaching Len. The Clausel family knight stood directly in front of them, indicating that the village belonged to the Clausel family. If the other knight wanted to speak to Len, he had to get past them first. As if to emphasize this point, the knight of the Clausel family implied that the Viscount should at least know the rules of etiquette, regardless of faction or rank differences. A moment of tension ensued as everyone fell silent, holding their breath. Finally, the Viscount's knight relented, saying they would correct their mistake. Then they departed, while the knight of the Clausel family simply watched them go into the distance with a weary gaze. Back inside the house, Len's father read the letter, which listed the Viscount's reasons for including their village in his territory. Simply put, there are no factional disputes, even in this small, nameless village, something that Sir Clausel confirmed. The Leomel Empire was divided into 3 factions, led by the nobles. The first faction was the Imperial faction, deeply devoted to the Lion King, the founder of the nation. They believed that only the royal family could lead the country. Next is the Heroic faction, comprised of those who have produced heroes who have defeated the Demon King. They are led by 7 great noble families, and are hailed as the main faction in the game, the Legend of the 7 Heroes. Viscount Givens also belonged to this faction. However, many believed that the power of the Imperial faction needed to be limited in order for the Leomel Empire to become more free and democratic. Additionally, they argued that the wealth gap needed to be reduced. Finally, the third faction was the Neutralist, comprised of peacemakers who disliked conflict, including Count Clausel. Returning to the present, Len asks Knight Clausel whether it is easy to annex a region into the territory of another noble. The knight replies that it is possible, provided both sides agree, although this is a very rare occurrence. The question was why they would want to seize a small, nameless village like theirs. The knight had a hunch that the Viscount might be plotting something behind the scenes. There must have been some motive behind this merger. After all, many hoped to draw the Clausel family into their fold. The Count was a distinguished nobleman, and the presence of the Saintess of White was of great importance. Len silently considered the fact that he didn't want to get involved in this trouble. However, because his family was connected to the Clausel family, he couldn't avoid it. If anything, they might have been drawn into an unimaginable mess. The Viscount's current objectives remain unclear, but there's nothing wrong with being cautious. While reading the letter, Len noticed something strange and called his father to pay attention. According to the letter, they wanted to annex the village and station knights there to compensate for the shortage of military forces. Were they really referring to Chief Wolven as a military shortfall? Len's father thought so too, but the incident was an isolated case and moreover, it was an anomaly. Aside from the Chief Wolven event, there was no record of the Ashton family lacking military strength. Len thought for a moment, and he recalled his conversation with Vios. The older man had told him that if there was damage from monsters in the territory, the Lord could be punished for repeatedly deploying insufficient forces. The young knight also supported this view, saying that it was the Lord's responsibility to protect his territory. Following this logic, Len concluded that if the land and neighboring villages suffered serious damage, then the Clausel family would likely be punished. He thought that might be Viscount Given's target. Everyone was astonished by the Viscount's idea of using the situation to blame the Clausel family. Len thought that the Viscount might try to feign help to the accused Earl and then lure them into joining the hero's side. It seems the Viscount had been plotting this for a long time. The worst-case scenario is the Chief Wolven incident may have been orchestrated by Viscount Givens from the beginning. Len's father said that the suspicion might be far-fetched, but it was still a serious accusation. Len explained to his father that he might be overthinking things, as he currently had no evidence to prove his suspicions. However, if that were the case, everything would make sense. Len's father understood. Even Sir Clausel was surprised by Len's conclusion. Frankly, he said that the Count was also concerned about this possibility, and he praised Len's reasoning skills. The knights then decided to report everything to the Count. Everyone in the room advised each other to be more vigilant. Len couldn't help but worry about the possibility of facing the heroes he had fought alongside in the story, but there was nothing they could do at this point. And so time passed, and winter has arrived. One fine day, Len and the Clausel Knights went hunting, grateful for their help in providing food for the winter. Nevertheless, the knights still hoped Len would consider moving to the capital to achieve greater success. However, Len replied as always that he had no intention of leaving the village, as he was the heir to the Ashton family. I went home in a cheerful mood. Len was surprised to see Lisha sitting comfortably and reading a book. She informed him that his mother had gone out with Mrs. Rigg. But all she got in return was a "huh?" from Len. Len asked her what she was doing there, and she bluntly replied that if he refused to come to the city, then she will come to see him. Lisha returned with some gifts. First, there was a shower head and a crystal that could produce water. With this tool, Len no longer needs to go to the river to fetch water. All the magical items she brought were powered by magic stones. However, Len worried that these items were very valuable. Lisha reassured him that they were old items she had repaired with her savings. Moreover, these gifts were merely a small apology for the incident with Viscount Givens. The Baron also wanted to object, but even that was difficult, especially when they were facing higher-ranking nobles. Although Lisha is the Saintess of White, that's all she can do. Those who held the title of Saintess were blessed by the god Elfin, and are believed to have been reincarnated many times throughout history. However, they never defeated the Monster Lord or achieved the great feats of the Seven Heroes. Lisha changed the subject, asking Len to take her to his father's room. Lisha used her divine magic to heal Len's father, and he appreciated the princess's efforts. As they left the elderly man's room, Len asked if she had received any treatment before coming here, and she replied that she had. Len had no idea about that, which surprised him quite a bit. They both continued their familiar training routine, and Len noticed her movements were sharper than before. Suddenly, Lisha lost her balance, but Len quickly caught her before she fell to the ground. It made her heart race. She immediately retreated, and she started complimenting him on his stamina. Len didn't have time to respond because she went on to talk about how much she enjoyed her training sessions with him. She suggested that they continue their duel the following morning. Lisha stayed at Ashton's house for a few more days. Make the most of your time to exercise as much as possible. Before she left, Len couldn't believe that Lisha had actually kept her promise to see him. However, Len knew that becoming too close to her wasn't a good idea, because of what happened in the game. Time flies by quickly, and the next significant event that affected Len's life occurred in the spring of his 11th year. By this time, his father had fully recovered and resumed hunting with him. They were on their way back when they discovered that Viscount Given's cavalry is standing in front of their house. The same man from before. He greeted Len warmly. He extended another invitation to Len to join. The Viscount told them that this time it wasn't just an invitation, but a special offer for Len. He offered to sponsor Len's enrollment in a special class at the prestigious Royal Cadet Academy. Everyone was extremely surprised by this offer, especially since getting into the academy was difficult enough, and the fact that Len was able to become a member of the special class was even more impressive. The knight proudly stated that everyone knew the special class at the academy was an excellent place, because it only accepts heirs from 7 great heroic families and those of noble lineage. There are also some exceptional talents nurtured right in the imperial capital, who are also selected for this class. Since the Viscount is the Vice Minister of Justice, it would be easy for him to send a letter of recommendation to the academy. The knight turned to Len, asking if he wanted to develop his talent in the capital, but Len flatly refused. The knight couldn't believe his ears. Had he really refused this invitation? Len reiterated that he wanted to stay in the village. This angered the knight, and he loudly demanded to know why Len didn't want to become a nobleman. Len could have received the title as soon as he graduated. Len was firm in his decision because he knew the Royal Cadet Academy was an important setting in Legend of the Seven Heroes. The main character in the game is also a member of a special class. If Len joins the academy, it will lead him back into the game's timeline, and he will eventually kill Lisha. Len told the knight that he was content with his daily life in his village. Instead of continuing to argue with Len, the knight decided to discuss the matter with Len's father. This time, he asked the father if he wanted to make Len a nobleman. The father also thought that if his son could enroll in school in the imperial capital and learn about the world, it would be a good thing. However, he insisted that the final decision rested with Len. Furthermore, the father stated that he took pride in serving the Clausel family for generations. Therefore, he would write a reply to the Viscount's invitation so that the knight could take it back. The knight was taken completely by surprise. He said they would personally convey the reply to the Viscount, and the knight expressed his disappointment with Len and his father's choice. They left shortly afterwards, and a few days later, knights from the Clausel family hurried to Len's house. They brought along Lisha, who was ill. Vios explained that the young lady had been ill 3 days prior while they were in the middle of a visit to another village. According to him, she suffers from a strange disease that only affects children with high magical powers. Fortunately, the disease is not contagious, and once a child is infected, they develop immunity to it. The worrying aspect is that the disease has no warning signs and can strike at any time. If the young lady's immune system is weakened, the illness could lead to dangerous complications and even death. Therefore, she needs to rest for at least 2 to 3 weeks. Len turned pale upon hearing those words and immediately offered to take care of Lisha until she recovers. 3 days later, Lisha's condition finally stabilized. When she woke up, Len had come to visit her in her room. He gazed intently at her flushed cheeks, and immediately Lisha apologized. She began talking about how she had come to the village on her own and then fallen ill shortly afterward. Worse still, she had caused Len to have to take care of her. Although Lisha didn't dare lift her head, she went on to say that the purpose of this trip was to demonstrate their resolve to Viscount Givens. They planned to visit more villages than usual because she wanted to leverage her influence as saintess to demonstrate that Clausel was united in her presence. At that moment, Lisha was sobbing uncontrollably, feeling hopeless because she couldn't do anything. She couldn't defeat Len, and this only made her feel like she was bringing shame to her mother's honor. When Len heard her mention her mother, he immediately asked about her. Lisha tearfully recounted how overjoyed her mother was to learn that her daughter was the Saintess of White. She believed that Lisha would accomplish great things, even if she passed away from illness. Lisha never met her mother, but every time she wore a white dress, she liked to imagine that her mother was cheering her on because it was the same outfit her mother had worn when she was young. Lisha always wanted to live up to everyone's expectations, but things didn't always go as planned. That's why she told Len that this would be the last time she visited him. Len was speechless. Meanwhile, Lisha went on to say that she had heard about him refusing Viscount Givens' invitation to the Imperial Military Academy. Witnessing her brother and father go to extremes to demonstrate their loyalty awakened her, making her realize that she needed to stop acting like a spoiled child. She discussed this with Vios, apologizing for causing trouble for his family, and she thanked them for their kindness. Len just bowed his head, thinking about Lisha's purity. If anyone keeps secrets, it's him. But is this really the end? When silence enveloped the atmosphere, Lisha broke the silence by asking to borrow some ink to write a letter to her father. Len was happy to help, telling her to check the stationery box on his desk. She was a little surprised, and then Len explained that she was actually in his room because he was busy tidying the living room when they got home. Lisha felt guilty again and continued to bother him. She felt guilty for making him uncomfortable with her unexpected remark. Len asked Lisha if she could bring a magical fire-making tool next time, even if it was just a backup. Lisha didn't understand what he was trying to say. She just said that this would be her last visit, but Len explained that he just wanted to have a fire-making tool at home the next time she visited. Lisha made it clear that this would be her last visit, as she didn't want to bother him anymore. Furthermore, she remembered that every time she suggested sparring with him, he always found a way to avoid it. Len explained that anyone would be confused if someone suddenly suggested sparring with them. However, if she promised to let him know in advance, he would agree. Len told Lisha that he would be ready to spar with her any time she wanted. He then left, but didn't forget to tell her they should talk more when she felt better. As soon as the door closed, Len felt a little annoyed with himself. He wondered what he had been doing on the other side of the door. Lisha wondered if Len was really serious when he said she might come back to visit the village again. As the headache gradually subsided, she stood up, and she went to Len's desk to begin writing a letter to her father. While searching, she stumbled upon a piece of paper neatly tucked away in the box. That's the letter she wrote earlier. Lisha's hands trembled with fear. Why is her letter here? She thought she had lost it. But that's not the main issue. This means Len read her letter. This made her sigh and sit down on the floor. She told herself that this letter wasn't a love letter, at least not in her opinion. She didn't love Len. She just genuinely admired Len in general. But why would he keep something like that? She had so many questions. But she decided to put the letter back in the box. She lay down on the bed and wondered what Len would think when he read her letter. The next day, when Len reread the letter, Vios and the other soldiers helped with carpentry and hunting as requested by the young lady. Len's father, along with Vios and others, went into the woods while he assigned Len the task of making repairs. Len's mother went to see Mrs. Rigg to get more medicine. Lisha stayed at home while everyone else was busy helping out in the village. Because she was recovering slowly, everyone thought she only needed another week to fully recover. And they could continue their journey to Colossal. At least that's what everyone thinks. One day, while everyone was away, it suddenly started raining heavily, forcing all activities to come to a halt. Len and 2 other knights are sheltering from the rain. Then suddenly he smelled something burning. It smells like a field after controlled burning. Feeling uneasy, Len ran quickly home. He was stunned to see his house on fire. He rushed in faster. He saw several knights lying fallen, covered in blood. He examined a body and discovered the knight's neck had been bitten. Was this done by a monster? But more importantly, Lisha is still at home. Without hesitation, Len charged in, sword in hand. He found the bodies of the remaining knights lying inside the house. Finally, he went to his room upstairs. He saw a figure wearing a hood next to a winged creature. This creature is a D-class monster called a mana eater. Lisha remained unconscious in bed. Meanwhile, the other figure just stood and watched as Len charged forward. That person had guessed who he was, but Len didn't have time to do anything. Len's vision began to spin, and he collapsed to the floor. He has no strength left. At that moment, the figure revealed that he was holding a powerful type of incense. This incense is powerful enough to incapacitate a dragon for several days. As Len's consciousness gradually faded, he tried to reach out to Lisha once more, before everything plunged into darkness. When Len woke up, he realized that both his hands and feet were tightly bound. He tried to stand up, and he saw Lisha lying beside him, also tied up and unconscious. He approached her and asked if she was all right. He noticed she was still breathing. Len breathed a sigh of relief. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the other side, surprised to see Len awake. But then the voice said that 4 days had passed since that event. The shadowy figure warned Len that if he tried to escape, he would be harmed, urging him to endure a few more days and not to do anything foolish. But 4 days have passed. How far are they from the village now? Len wondered why this person had kidnapped them, and based on what had happened before, he was certain that the man was a beast tamer, capable of summoning and controlling monsters. Because he could control a D-class monster, Len believed this was someone he couldn't risk confronting without a plan. But more importantly, Lisha's condition is deteriorating. If things continue like this, she will be in danger. Len was determined not to let her die, and he swore he would save her. That night, Len had a dream. He dreamed about Len Ashton from the original story. In his dream, he didn't dare go and get the necessary rondo grass. He did this to treat his father, which ultimately led to his father's death. After the death of his father, their village was attacked by something, resulting in the deaths of many villagers. Len's mother even nearly died, until Lisha and the knights arrived to save the village. Len's dream ends as Lisha began healing his mother, reminding her that she truly was a saintess. After seeing all of that, Len wondered if his dream was a reflection of how the character Len in the Legend of the Seven Heroes was portrayed. Was their encounter destined to happen this way? Len couldn't understand why he was dreaming about his original Len past at this moment, but at least he was glad to see that there was no tension in his relationship with Lisha. He woke up and found Lisha's condition had worsened. Len was still thinking about his dream, wondering why he had to kill her. And is there a particular reason behind this? Suddenly the carriage stopped. When the kidnapper opened the door and threw a bottle of water, lay a piece of bread at their feet. Len tried to convince the man to release him, but he refused. Anyway, he had already given them medicine and herbs over the past few days, so he didn't want to spoil them anymore. Before closing the door, the kidnapper told Len that screaming was useless, as he was using a magical device that only allowed him to hear what was happening inside the carriage. While he rested by the fire, Len hurriedly opened the water bottle. He used his mouth and knees to give Lisha some water to drink. Seeing her in this state, he knew she had reached her limit, and that's why he had to act. Tonight, the full moon had risen high in the sky. The fire has gone out. When Len decided to act, he first checked through a gap in the carriage. Then he summoned the metal demon sword. He was immediately freed from his chains, removed the chain from the leg, and prepared to open the car door. Before taking action, he checked his surroundings, and he found the kidnapper had fainted. Len moved stealthily, sword in one hand, the other supporting Lisha. Suddenly, mana eaters appeared, shouting from the sky. Len was forced to dodge when a monster nearly crushed him and Lisha. He cut the horse-drawn carriage in half. This created a disturbance that blocked the path of the remaining mana eater, but also awakened the kidnapper. This chaos created a cloud of smoke for Len. He threw the metal demon sword at the cloaked figure. He dodged it in time, but the sword still managed to cut through the pendant he was wearing. When he asked Len where he got his weapon, Len's sword cut through the horse's reins just in time. And Len summoned the wooden demon sword again. Len pointed his sword at Mana Eater, who was charging towards him, and simultaneously summoned his natural magic to restrict its movement. Then do the same with the kidnapper. He also stole his pendant. Before they jumped onto their horses, seeing them preparing to escape, the cloaked figure raised his stick to stop them. But Len quickly snatched the item from his hand with the robber's demon sword. Len was trying to calm his horse when a Mana Eater lunged down, nearly biting him in the face. If he hadn't managed to strike it down at the last moment, he probably would have been injured. As the Mana Eater fell, Len decided to take advantage of this opportunity to escape. The horse galloped away with all its might. The cloaked figure had broken Len's natural magic, and he summoned the monsters of the forest. This time, 3 different monsters were chasing them. Len now understood the enemy's true strength. He could only control monsters weaker than himself. Len summoned his metal demon sword, taking down multiple monsters at once, even though countless other creatures continued to chase him. Suddenly, Mana Eater appeared. It spewed fire right behind them, but Len didn't flinch. He was only focused on escaping, oblivious to the pursuit. Meanwhile, in Clausel, Vios delivered the news to Baron Lazard Clausel. Lisha's father told her that his daughter had been kidnapped. Vios apologized profusely and promised to accept any penalty, but he begged the Baron to allow him to find and rescue the girl first. The Baron did not blame this loyal man. He understood that it was Lisha's orders that had caused the captain of the Night Watch to abandon her. With that in mind, Lisha's father ordered Vios to contact the imperial capital, the nobles of their faction, and the emperor about this emergency. However, things were interrupted when a servant burst into the room, informing Baron Lazard that he had a guest from the imperial capital. Lazard confronted 3 men, those who claimed to be there on behalf of the Minister of Justice. They brought an official letter with them. It was stated that Baron Lazard Clausel was under investigation for negligence in management, which resulted in monsters causing serious harm to the neighboring territory of Viscount Givens. Meanwhile, Len and Lisha had successfully shaken off their kidnappers and the beasts, and were now lost in the misty wilderness. Len set Lisha up against a tree trunk. He gave her the medicine, promising that it would work, even though it tasted very bitter. After Lisha finished drinking, Len continued to look after her as they wandered aimlessly. After a while, Lisha's fever subsided, and she asked Len how he had obtained those medicines. Len told Lisha that he had traded the potions for some monster materials he had gathered in a nearby village 3 days earlier, along with some travel supplies. Lisha thanks him, and she realized they were on the edge of Viscount Givens territory, which made Len curious and ask how she knew. Lisha pointed toward the Baldur mountain range. She explained that she could lead the way from there because she could estimate their location. Looking up at the mountain range, Len suddenly remembered that this was where the final battle with the main boss in the first part of the game took place. He asked Lisha how long it would take to get to Clausel, and she replied that it would take about 4 days. But more importantly, she wanted to ensure his family's safety first. Len reassured them that his parents were fine because they weren't home when the incident occurred. If anything had happened, he was sure they were safely sheltered somewhere right now. Len thought this was a good time to visit Clausel, not only to meet the Baron, but also to do some sightseeing. Night quickly fell, and the two sought shelter in a nearby cave. As soon as the fire was lit, Len began preparing dinner. A bird. He caught it in a nearby tree using vines. Upon hearing mention of vines, Lisha asked if Len was referring to his mysterious sword. Len nodded, but said the true nature of that power was a secret. Lisha pouted slightly, but didn't ask any further questions. Instead, she started rummaging through their bags. That's when she found the pendant that Len had gotten from the kidnapper. Curious, Lisha asked if the object was a magical tool and if it was broken. From what Len remembers, the kidnapper said he used some kind of magic tool to soundproof the carriage, so it's very likely that item. Lisha stared intently at the pendant, saying they could use it as evidence if they encountered a difficult situation. Before long, their dinner was ready. A little later, Len gave Lisha her meal, and the princess gently took a bite. Lisha was surprised at how delicious the food was. Len was pleased to know it suited her taste. The following day, they continued their journey to Clausel. They walked along, picking fruit from the trees along the roadside. They stopped to rest by a river, where Len takes advantage of the opportunity to do laundry and help the princess bathe. As Len approached to help, the sudden distance between them made Lisha blush. Len quickly realized this and placed his palm on her forehead to check her temperature. Lisha quickly stepped back. She was confused by this unexpected action, and then she suddenly remembered that Len had read her letter. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Lisha asked why he still kept it. The question confused Len. What was she talking about? He asked directly, but the princess simply avoided the question out of embarrassment, leaving Len lost in thought about what she was implying. Len recalled the magic stones he had collected before, and his mother had also mentioned that his father collected them when he was young. Was Lisha referring to that collection of magic stones? Perhaps the princess found this hobby strange. After a minute of silence, Len told Lisha that it had always bothered him, but didn't mention the magic stone directly. The princess misunderstood again, startled by his answer. What? Did he mean she was always on his mind? Len simply replied that it was the only way he could express it. This made Lisha even more embarrassed. She stammered, saying that he could do whatever he wanted. This made Len think that perhaps the princess didn't like the magic stones, because they were taken from monsters. He quickly apologized for his strange hobby, but Lisha misunderstood again. To avoid prolonging this awkward conversation, she quickly changed the subject. She told him to just call her by her name. This made Len even more confused. They both passed through another village where Len traded materials from monsters for food. An old woman asked them where they were going, and Len explained that they were just travelers with no specific destination. The old woman said that if they kept going straight, they would reach Clausel. This led Len to ask what was so special about that place. According to the old woman, a recent adventurer, the adventurer said that the Baron there was about to be punished. This time it was Lisha who spoke up and questioned the old woman again. Why did something like this happen to her? The old woman replied that she didn't know. But there were rumors that the Baron had incited the monster to attack Viscount Givens. Without wanting to delay another moment, both of them immediately set off for Clausel. Lisha knew for sure that her father would never do such a thing, so it was clearly a made-up story. Meanwhile, at Clausel, a luxurious carriage appeared in the city. It attracted the attention of the people. The persistent knight had previously welcomed the arrival of Viscount Givens at Clausel. He happily reported that once they gained control of the land, the influence of the heroic faction would expand significantly. The Viscount coldly replied that, in order to save Liamel from ruin, their first task was to defeat the Clausel family. Baron Clausel and Viscount Givens finally confronted each other. The representative of the Attorney General stated that the royal court will carefully consider this matter in accordance with the great royal law, based on the arguments presented to them. He added that the official announcement would be made tomorrow morning, at the same time as today's hearing. Everyone present began to murmur in surprise at this decision. The Baron finally spoke. He said he already knew what the outcome would be. In a few days, he would be taken to the imperial palace and punished. Although Vios tried to suggest they file an appeal to take the case to the royal court, or even a good faith trial, but the Baron interrupted. Just looking at Viscount Givens' face was enough. The Baron said, "He seems to know full well that victory is already his. Whatever he does will likely face interference, and that's the best-case scenario, before the trial even begins." However, he still found it strange that a high-ranking nobleman would resort to such extreme methods. This led the Baron to wonder whether this was merely a factional dispute. Back to Len and Lisha, the two decided to camp in the woods that night. The princess was settled in her camping bed. Len stayed awake all night, thinking about how he could save everyone. As things stood, the Baron would be wrongly accused and lose his power. And worse, according to Lisha, not much could be expected from the neutral, high-ranking nobles. What could a child like him possibly do? Lisha wasn't actually asleep. She was quietly observing him. Len had told her he was thinking about what he could do to help the Baron. She told him to call her Lisha, and in return she would call him Len. She sat up and suggested they set off early in the morning. They need to return to Clausel immediately to testify about the kidnapping. However, the question is whether people will believe them or not. They needed evidence linking the kidnapping to Viscount Givens. They both wondered how they could help the Baron. As discussed, they set off at dawn. They walked through the rubble in the forest, vacant lots, and soon, Lisha realized they were in familiar territory. Even though they had strayed from the main road, Lisha told Len that as they passed through the forest and hills ahead, they would soon reach Clausel. Hearing this, Len asked if they were safe, and Lisha confirmed, as there would be guards from Clausel patrolling the area. However, as they both took a few more steps, a familiar but unwelcoming face appeared before them. It was Viscount Givens' knight. His knights breathed a sigh of relief upon finding them. Both Len and Lisha froze, completely taken aback by the sudden appearance of these knights. Viscount Givens' knights explained that they had been searching for them for the past few days at the Baron's request. From within the bushes, more of Viscount Givens' knights appeared. They surrounded Len and Lisha. Don't leave them any escape route. Viscount Givens' knight continued to say that they needed to leave immediately and offered to take them back to safety. They both fell silent. Meanwhile, Lisha bowed her head and asked if she could resolve the matter. She warned that this action could endanger both of them. But Len comforted her, assuring her that he would be prepared for whatever might happen next. Noticing that they were planning something, one of the knights asked what they were discussing. Lisha then drew the knight's attention, stating that the decision to go with him would depend on his explanation. She took out the pendant that Len had taken from the kidnapper and showed it to the knight. Lisha asked him if he recognized the pendant, but he replied no, even asking what it was. However, Lisha quickly noticed a subtle change in his expression when his eyebrow twitched slightly. She explained that it was a magical device they had obtained from the kidnapper. Viscount Givens and his knights disagreed, and he offered to accept the pendant as proof. But Lisha refused, saying she would have the merchants check it. This statement made the knight hesitate, and Lisha went on to explain that the Merchants Association would know who was selling it, or at least have information about the previous owner. The knight tried to convince her, saying it was impossible because there were too many magical devices in the Leomel Empire. Lisha understood that this magical item was very valuable because it wasn't common, and she was confident that the leader of the merchant guild in the capital could find information about it. Knowing the origin will help them determine whether the item was stolen or whether it was given to a kidnapper by someone else. If the latter is the case, the person who gave it to the kidnapper will certainly have to appear in court and be held accountable for their crime, because someone deliberately slandered the Clausel family. A tense silence prevailed when the knights exchanged glances. However, Viscount Givens and his knight commander continued to feign ignorance, saying it was all the more important if he were the one to carry the item, and demanding that Lisha hand it over to him. Lisha called him an idiot because they had no obligation to hand over anything to him. Moreover, they were in Clausel territory, and even the village where the kidnapping occurred was under their control. The knight tried to protest, but before he could say anything, the princess interrupted, saying that she did not want to be protected by an unreasonable knight. Then she told Len that they should continue on their way, even though the knight said they needed an escort. Lisha insisted, saying they didn't need an escort as they were almost at the city. She didn't even trust anyone to protect her besides Len. She strode past the knight and said it. The knight gritted his teeth in anger at her actions. Then he drew his sword and prepared to attack Len and Lisha. He demanded that they go with him. However, before the knight could act, Len summoned his sword. He used his sword to cut through the other man's sword, then cut his hand. This resulted in him being completely disarmed. Despite his injuries, the knight still clutched Len's cloak. Meanwhile, Lisha thanked Len, as the knight was now unable to harm them. Now they can bring Viscount Givens to trial for another crime. Lisha used her sacred magic. Lisha sent him flying backward off his horse, and the magic began to burn his arm. The remaining knights decided to intervene, preventing Len and Lisha from escaping. Len summoned his wooden demon sword. He used natural magic to imprison the other knights. This creates an opportunity for both of them to escape. Viscount Givens and his chief knight ordered the rest of the men to give chase, because they needed to report the matter to the Viscount. They had to capture Len and Lisha alive at all costs. The other knights pursued them. They were determined to capture Len and Lisha alive, and the chase lasted all night. Lisha was now desperate, begging their horse to try just a little harder, and she promised that they would reach the human settlement if they could get over the hill ahead. But surprisingly, the same cloaked figure was waiting for them at the top of the cliff. With mana eaters ready and waiting for orders, their kidnappers had anticipated that the two would pass through this area. Before Len could react, the monster with the hammer raised its hand. The ground shook, and immediately afterward, the ground collapsed, preventing their horse from moving further. Plant-like and insect-like monsters quickly emerged from cracks in the ground. Lisha turned to Len, asking for a sword, and they found that the monsters had devoured the two knights who were chasing them. The beast trainer appeared from above, saying that he knew Lisha wouldn't surrender easily, so he was forced to use force. If they continue to resist, he will have no choice but to kill them. Len uses natural magic to trap the bee-like monsters, while Lisha chopped the mushrooms. Together they eliminated all the monsters, but Len noticed that she had become much stronger. Of course, she practiced hard to beat Len. However, despite joining forces, neither could deny that they were outnumbered. And they will soon be exhausted unless they defeat the beast trainer. The ground shook again, and a gigantic, monstrous worm emerged from beneath the ground, ready to devour them. Len remained calm, summoning his metal monster sword. He swiftly slashed the giant worm-like monster with his sword. This time, Lisha also had to admit Len's strength. But his attention had shifted to the kidnapper. He removed his hood, revealing himself, and commented on how Len used wind pressure to defeat the monster. Len was stunned when she realized who the kidnapper was. Is Yerku, a beast trainer, one of the bosses that appeared in the first part of The Legend of the Seven Heroes. Len recalled how his character had struggled when facing his natural magic. But right now, his concern wasn't the past. But that's the current situation when he's an adventurer wandering across the continent. Len couldn't possibly have encountered Yerk so soon. He should have met him after joining the Imperial Officer Academy. Even though Len and Lisha were surrounded by countless monsters, his mind was still racing, wondering why Yerku was here. In the game, Yerku is a notorious beast trainer known for his ruthless nature, even killing his own kind, which led to his exile from his homeland. Yerku's arm was powerfully sealed as punishment for his crimes. However, the help of the staff had previously restored some of his true power. Without it, Yerku's strength was reduced to the point where he couldn't use two skills simultaneously. Len thought that destroying the staff before they escaped might be the reason Yerku didn't use his natural magic to attack them. But if he was hired by Viscount Givens, it's possible this man provided some information that helped Yerk break his seal. Now that the hills were almost completely overrun with monsters, Yerku continued to fight and defeat his opponents. Lisha asks Len if he can defeat Yerku, adding that she might have to change her tactics depending on his answer. This monster trainer has two D-level monsters by his side, and if the Mana Eaters attacked both of them, Len thought it would be their defeat. However, the surprising thing is, Lisha isn't that pessimistic. She reminded him that she was the Saint of White Light. Unexpectedly, Lisha began to gather energy, sparks of light like dust swirling around them. As she bowed her head and touched the tip of her sword to her fingertips, Len felt a powerful surge of energy coursing through his body. Before Yerku could even realize what was happening, Len and Lisha had wiped out the monsters in the blink of an eye. Thanks to Lisha's holy magic, they destroyed all the monsters, until a Mana Eater flew toward them. Mana Eater spews flames upon approaching. Lisha used sacred magic to protect them. Meanwhile, Len severed the monster's wing as it approached. This caused the monster to cry out in pain and burst into flames. It incinerated the remaining monsters in its path. With Lisha by his side, Len believed they could get through it. However, a giant worm monster emerged from beneath the ground. Despite facing numerous immediate threats, Lisha also believed they would win as long as Len was by their side. Len was determined to destroy Yerku. As their horses charged toward the enemy, amidst the burning corpses of monsters, Len raised his sword, preparing to deliver the decisive blow. But at that moment, Mana Eater appeared, blocking Yerku's path and protecting its master from the direct attack. The Mana Eater monster rammed into them. This caused both of them to fall off their horses. Luckily, Len managed to catch Lisha just in time. Meanwhile, Yerku stood there, bleeding, until the rock beneath his feet crumbled under Len's attack. Amidst the charred corpses of monsters scattered everywhere, Len checked to see if Lisha was okay, noticing how weak she was. As he suspected, sacred magic was too much for her, compounded by her illness. But he couldn't dwell on that thought any longer. Len realizes that his enemy is still alive. Even though he was injured, and he laughed maniacally when he saw the blood on his hands. He didn't know if all the blood had been drained from his body yet. But as long as he bears the mark, his sole objective is to kill as many people as possible. But now even that has become impossible. He wondered if this was the end for him, until his gaze settled on Lisha, who was in a state of panic. He felt a familiar sensation, a sense of pleasure in seeing the expression of someone about to die. That feeling filled him with exhilaration, especially when he was close to someone. Len became more wary of him, asking what the monster hunter intended to do. Suddenly, the previously injured Mana Eater emerged from the rubble behind his enemy. At this moment, Yerku extended his hand, and he ordered Mana Eater to bite off his arm. A look of madness appeared on Yerku's face when he ordered the Mana Eater to devour both his left arm and the seal. The monster immediately complied, creating a gruesome scene of bloodshed. Right in front of Len and Lisha. After devouring the left arm, the Mana Eater proceeded to eat its master's right arm, causing Yerku to cry out in both joy and pain. Before the monster could devour his arm, its body began to transform. Chains emerged from Yerku's chest, imprisoning him, while a young sapling began to sprout beside him. It turned out that even sacrificing both arms wasn't enough to break the seal. But now, with things having come to this point, the monster hunter is desperate, determined to put an end to it all, more than ever. He had barely regained his balance when another sword pierced his body. This sent the transformed Mana Eater flying. Meanwhile, Yerku's sapling produced a vial of medicine and crushed the medicine bottle. Let the liquid spill all over his body. Despite being an expensive medicine, it couldn't alleviate the pain in Yerk's animal enclosure, as he could still perceive everything clearly. The Mana Eater began wreaking havoc. Just in time, Len moved Lisha out of the way. He summoned his spirit sword, just as Yerk finally ordered the monster to kill both of them. Before Len could land his first blow, the Mana Eater vanished right before his eyes. The Mana Eater appeared beside him and attacked him immediately. Len managed to dodge it, but was still thrown flying by the force of the blow. And the monster took advantage of the opportunity to strike him hard. In midair, Len's body remained suspended as Mana Eater decided to use her hind legs to crush him. Luckily, Len was quicker and managed to dodge the attack at the last minute. When the monster uses its tail to attack, Len didn't have time to get help, thinking they were in big trouble. Because this Mana Eater was completely different from the monster he had ever known. Furthermore, it was already grade B. Or perhaps the monster is much stronger. The monster roared, towering like a skyscraper, overshadowing everything around it. At that moment, Lisha finally woke up and witnessed the battle between Len and Mana Eater. She witnessed Len being thrown around, covered in blood and bruises, right in front of her. As the monster began to approach, Yerku was completely covered in vegetation, reveling in the brutality unfolding before its eyes. Lisha crawled towards Len and used sacred magic to heal him, enough to restore his consciousness. She held out her hand. "Thank you, Len, for always protecting her, even when she was selfish." She gave him a small smile and told him to go, to escape. As the monster approached, Len smiled back and told her that he would never leave her. At this moment, Mana Eater stood above them, preparing to crush them with its claws. Len turned around and blocked the attack with his sword. A tense moment ensued as Len stood firm, until he pushed the monster back, causing it to lose its balance. Len also fell at the same time, his sword disintegrating. When he fell on top of Lisha, his hand rested on her chest, his arms began to grow larger, and he saw in his notification that a new demon sword was now available for use. Mana Eater stood up, preparing to attack them. When Len summoned his new sword, he was determined to protect Lisha at all costs. Len summoned a lightsaber. He pointed his finger at Mana Eater, creating a beam of light that pierced through half of the monster's body. The final beam of light enveloped its entire body. And also Yerk, the monster hunter. He also vanished when his body was captured in that beam of light. A great flash of light erupted over the mountains. Then the light burst and released a beam that pierced the night sky, illuminating the entire surrounding forest. Len still doesn't fully understand the power he just used. Then he fell unconscious, with the light still swirling around them. At Clausels, the city came alive early that morning, as most residents awoke to see the Baron before he was transported to the imperial capital. Even the public is skeptical, given that the trial ended just a few days ago, yet the court has already issued a verdict. They knew that Viscount Givens was an aristocrat, an assistant to the Minister of Justice. So many suspected that he was pulling the strings behind the scenes. Indeed, the baronial transition process had begun. Among them were Viscount Givens and his knights. Once the Baron's transfer is complete, the capital will take over control. One thing puzzled him. Why was the Viscount so interested in Len Ashton? He could understand if his lord were interested in white saints, but Len Ashton was merely a country knight. Upon hearing this, Viscount Givens smiled and revealed that he had recently stumbled upon some important information about Len Ashton. The Viscount believed that if he could control the entire Ashton family, then there would be a chance for the Givens family to rise among the heroes. The nobleman decided to withhold other essential information, telling the other man that he would understand later. If anything happens, he was more worried about the beam of light he saw at sunset. If it was the power of saintess, then something could only have happened to Yerku. In response, the knight told his lord that he would dispatch the rest of his army to investigate, hoping they would be able to capture them soon. Viscount Givens issued the final order to resolve the matter, as he did not want the situation to become any more complicated. Outsmarting the Emperor's faction was difficult enough, so failure was not an option. The two were so busy talking to each other that they didn't notice a figure standing and observing in the crowd. As they passed through Klausel's gate, they saw someone approaching them. They couldn't identify him because his identity was hidden in the morning sunlight. Everyone stopped, eager to know who it was. When Vios realized it was the princess and Len, he rushed to her side, while the Baron called out to her, but was stopped by the other knights. Lisha said they would explain everything later, because at this moment she didn't want to waste Len's efforts. She turned to Viscount Givens. She spoke so disrespectfully that he felt a certain contempt for her impoliteness. The Viscount warned her to be careful with her words, but Lisha responded that she had no respect whatsoever for criminals. The Viscount was surprised. Then he smirked and said that it was her father who was the convicted criminal. Lisha did not respond to his accusation, but from her expression it was clear the princess was trying to remain calm. Looking at her, it seems like she's been through a lot of hardship, and she's barely managing to stay conscious. Lisha took a deep breath before handing them the pendant they had taken from Yerku. She told the Viscount that this was a magical artifact they had obtained from the goblin he had hired to abduct them. She asserted that if they investigated the pendant, they would find a connection between the Viscount and their kidnapper. Instead of feeling threatened or surprised, Viscount Givens looked at Lisha with contempt and asked, "Is this really coming from the mouth of Princess Saintess?" But the princess did not back down, reiterating her earlier position and declaring that they had been attacked by goblins hired by the Viscount. Viscount Givens responded to her question, asking why they had appeared from there. Furthermore, this magical tool alone is not enough as proof. Lisha began to feel increasingly frustrated. She insisted that they should conduct an investigation first, and they had also been attacked by the Viscount's knights in the nearby forest. Upon hearing this, the Viscount merely frowned at the new accusation. The princess pointed to his chief knight. She knew he was the one who had drawn his sword and attacked her. And when Viscount Givens turned to ask his knight if that was true, the knight lied, saying he was busy patrolling the woods outside the city on the Viscount's orders. With those words, Viscount Givens declared that the princess had been deceived by someone. Lisha refused to give up, insisting that the investigation be conducted. But the Viscount said that was unnecessary. Finally, Vios spoke up, siding with the princess and suggesting that it would be a good idea to consider Lisha's words. Viscount Givens, however, insisted that it was unnecessary. If they truly wanted to, they could hold a new trial in the imperial capital. After a moment of silence, Len finally spoke up and said they should show their arms. The Viscount, surprised, asked Len who he was talking to. As soon as Len said he was referring to the Viscount's knight, Len was almost completely unconscious. His body leaned against Lisha's back. The princess turned to the Viscount's knight and asked him to turn his hand over, because it should have had a scar from when Len and Lisha fought him earlier. Vios also approached the knight, asking him to do the same. Meanwhile, this person turned to look at the Viscount for help. But the Vios was starting to show impatience, even though the young rider insisted he was somewhere else. Finally, Vios threatened to chop him down. At this point, the people of Clausel began to feel uneasy, whispering and gossiping among themselves. When the Viscount's knight finally had to reveal his bandaged hand, Vios finally saw the scars on the young knight's hands, and he understood that they were not only sword wounds but also burns from holy magic. Vios points out that any wound inflicted by holy magic will leave a temporary mark, no matter how expensive the tonic. The young knight turned to look at Viscount Givens, but he just smirked. "I don't believe this evidence. If they so readily believe such things, then perhaps they should form a new council to prove this knight's innocence." But in any case, the Viscount insisted that it was best to settle everything in the imperial capital this time. The older man raised his voice, emphasizing that the first trial had concluded, and the laws of the empire were absolute. With that, the decision to transfer the Baron remained unchanged. Whispers began to rise in the crowd. Both the Vios and Lisha have gloomy expressions. When the Viscount announced that they would be transferred, at this moment Lisha began to cry. She reached out her hand, panicking and not knowing what to do. Suddenly, a round of applause rang out, drawing everyone's attention. Everyone turned around to see who was doing it, when an older man approached them. This man praised Lisha and Len's efforts and courage. He also said that he shared the same thoughts and feelings as them. Viscount Givens asked who the man was, and he only introduced himself as Edgar. Edgar smiled gently and told Lisha that he would now handle this matter. Edgar offered to help them finish the story, and then they both turned to the Viscount. Edgar added that he had come because of Baron Clausel on his master's orders. Viscount Givens raised his voice, showing impatience as he asked Edgar who his master was. Hearing this, Edgar maintained his gentle smile and produced a tiger seal, bearing the symbol of his master's family. Viscount Givens, his knights, and representatives of the Minister of Justice all turned pale upon seeing it. Meanwhile, Edgar savored the feeling that they had recognized their master without having to reveal his name. Viscount Givens stubbornly refused to back down, implying that Edgar was definitely plotting something. Edgar calmly explained that plotting against the noble family was a crime punishable by death, something the Viscount must have been well aware of. Edgar turned to the officials of the imperial court and announced that not only was he free to act as he pleased in this trial, but he also had the right to name his master. Before the other person could speak, Edgar went on to say that there were some points of contention in this story, and for that reason he proposed rescheduling the Baron's trial. Edgar told officials that his master was currently with Baron Clausel. He also sent his thanks to Len Ashton, to whom he is very grateful. If a similar situation were to occur again, Edgar's owner would follow up and resolve it thoroughly. Upon hearing the underlying threat in Edgar's statement, the officials and Viscount Givens only grew paler. The Viscount felt annoyed, wondering why this man had suddenly interfered in matters he shouldn't have. The pressure from Edgar's master only added to the Viscount's tension. Edgar declared that his master could now offer assistance without worry, thanks to the miracle created by Len and Lisha. After all, it was Len Ashton who had saved someone's life. Len opened his eyes and realized he was lying in bed. He was surrounded by an unfamiliar space. When Lisha woke up shortly afterwards, she hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. The princess told him what had happened. Len was surprised to discover that he had been unconscious for the past month. Lizard Clausel was also present in the room, insisting that Len should stay longer in his castle until his wounds healed. The Baron continued that, following the confrontation with Viscount Givens, a retrial was held that same day, and he was exonerated. Lycia's father was proven innocent, all thanks to the help of Len and the princess, for which he was immensely grateful. Conversely, Viscount Givens was placed under suspicion and was brought to trial in his own territory. But that trial never took place because the Viscount took his own life with poison. Len was shocked to hear this, but still doubted whether it was truly a suicide or if he had been forced to do so. The Baron also offered his speculation, suggesting that Viscount Givens might have been coerced by his family. Alternatively, it was possible the elderly man had chosen to give up rather than be captured. What's even stranger is that someone set fire to his villa, and nothing was left. However, despite this unfortunate incident, Lizard Clausel thanked Len once again for helping him out of trouble. After all, it was thanks to Len that a high-ranking nobleman decided to help. Len felt confused, not understanding what the Baron meant. The older man explained that it all concerned Chief Wolven and the incidents that occurred. The materials obtained from the monster's carcass were considered valuable medicinal ingredients, but there was a rather complicated aspect to it. The Chief Wolven's internal organs had to be kept intact, otherwise they could not be refined and used as medicine. Due to the difficulty in obtaining it, the medicine extracted from Chief Wolven is rarely distributed worldwide. But Len succeeded in killing the monster and keeping all its internal organs and other body parts in good condition. Because of their near-perfect condition, the Baron made an agreement with a Marquis who wanted the material, on the condition that he would cooperate with Lazar in case of an emergency. The medicine from Chief Wolven saved the life of the Marquis' daughter. He had been bedridden for many years due to illness. After recounting the story, the Baron gave Len the Marquis' card, saying that the Marquis had invited Len to his mansion upon seeing it. Len immediately recognized the family crest engraved on the card. Lizard Clausel eventually told Len that the card belonged to the Marquis Ignart, a great nobleman of whom the royal family was extremely proud. Now, Len understood why the family crest on the card looked so familiar. That's the story of the final villain in the Legend of the Seven Heroes. The Marquis was a man of both military and cultural talent, behind the impressive development of maritime transport in the Empire. Despite being a respected nobleman, the Marquis collaborated with the enemy and plotted to resurrect the Monster King to destroy the Layamel Empire. In the game, Len remembers that the reason the Marquis turned his back on the forces of justice was the death of his daughter, and as far as he knew, there was no way to save her. This made him wonder if he himself had just saved her life. In that regard, is the plot changing? Len dismissed that thought because his parents had now arrived after the village was attacked. Len's parents had evacuated long ago and went straight to Clausel as soon as they heard he was safe there. Although their house had been burned down, they still managed to take some belongings that had not been destroyed by the fire. Len's father was relieved to see that his son was all right. So much so that, in that moment, Len suddenly remembered that his bracelet had absorbed Lisha's magic the moment he touched her. Although there are no more inscriptions on the bracelet, but Len couldn't help but wonder why it reacted that way to Lisha. Furthermore, what kind of magical sword did he summon at that time? After meeting his parents, Len took a stroll around Clausel Castle with the princess. The two were chatting casually when Len suddenly stared at Lisha, wondering why he had done so. Although Len initially dismissed the idea, he still asked gently whether the princess had a magic stone with her. Lisha was surprised. How did Len know? Did her father tell him? Len quickly apologized, saying it was just a joke. But Lisha admitted that she did indeed have a magic stone within her body, and only the most powerful saints possessed them. She asked Len to keep this secret, as only the saint's family and the elders of the temple knew about it. Len promised to keep it a secret, but deep down he wondered, could the magical sword he created be related to the legend of the 7 heroes? This new story made him think more. But it also provides more answers than questions. Len couldn't help but wonder why he'd always tried to stay away from Lisha. Len was determined to avoid a terrible future, one that people said was unavoidable. But now he was in Clausel. If there's one thing Len is certain of, it's that he has completely changed the path of the original Len Ashton, the opposite of the dream he once had. His father should have died, and Yurku should have been just a mid-tier boss in the early part of the game. He also changed the fate of Ignart's daughter. But if things continue like this, will the Marquis betray the Empire in the future? Len realized that every decision he made impacted the world in ways he couldn't understand. Lost in thought, he was startled when he felt Lycia's hand touch his cheek. The princess was worried because he had suddenly fallen silent, and Len responded with a slight smile. He told her that he was just wondering who he was, until Lisha cupped his cheeks and told him he was her hero, no matter what anyone else said. Back at the headmaster's office of the Imperial Military Academy, the blinding white light seen at the Clausel border became breaking news. Even the Imperial press reported on it. And it is currently being read by Principal Cronoa Highland, someone who is looking forward to a little excitement in their life. In the first part of Legend of the 7 Heroes, several notable events occurred as the story progressed. One nobleman died from an unknown cause, and a royal guard lost his mind and turned his back on the third prince. Some called it an invasion, while others believed it was the wrath of God. However, none of that is true. All these horrific events were orchestrated by one man, the head of a noble family driven by a thirst for revenge, Marquis Ignart. His daughter was seriously ill, and despite his vast wealth and power, he was unable to find the right ingredients to create a cure. The Wolven monster's internal organs were exactly what he needed. Of course, the royal family had them readily available in case of unforeseen circumstances, but the emperor refused to share these resources with the Marquis. The emperor was not wrong to prioritize his family in case of an emergency. However, his refusal to marry the Marquis led to the death of the Marquis's daughter. Because of this, the Marquis harbored resentment towards the emperor. However, looking at what's happening in the current timeline, that bleak future is still a long way from becoming a reality. At the Marquis's mansion, Edgar recounted what had happened between the Saint and the Viscount at Clausel while he was serving afternoon tea. Based on the butler's story, the nobleman remained very impressed with Len. Ashton's character was affirmed by Edgar, with the Marquis even admitting that his resentment towards the Emperor had somewhat subsided after hearing about Len. Edgar intended to remind his master why the Emperor was acting this way, but the Marquis spoke first, saying that he understood the Emperor was only protecting the best interests of his family. He knew that, but accepting it was a completely different matter. Before Edgar could reply, the Marquis's daughter Fiona appeared. She was relieved to see the housekeeper had returned, causing Edgar to rush to her side in alarm. Fiona reassured him that she was fine and needed to be stronger. Furthermore, she wanted to hear more about the trip to Clausel. Edgar said it was a memorable trip, but didn't forget to remind her not to speak too casually to ordinary people like him. Fiona didn't mind because she had been used to speaking that way since childhood, influenced by her mother. She turned to her father and expressed her desire to go to Clausel to thank Len Ashton in person. The Marquis also wanted to do so, but Baron Lazar Clausel had asked them to wait a little longer, so they both had to comply with his request. In that case, Fiona suggested writing a letter. Her father also thought it was a good idea. However, he insisted that they should respect the Baron's request and urged his daughter to be a little more patient. Fiona's face showed a hint of sadness, but she understood her father's reasons. Nevertheless, deep down she always hoped that one day she could meet Len Ashton to express her profound gratitude. At this time in Clausel, Len was intently examining the Sarakia green gem while everyone else was asleep. From what he observed, this extremely rare item appeared to be an egg. Outwardly, it was encased in a shell so hard that no weapon or sword could damage it. Upon touching it, Len could sense a source of power within. He speculated that if he offered a large amount of magic and the horn of a great dragon to this item, it might hatch. When the creature inside the gem was born, it would most likely swear absolute loyalty to its master. From what Len remembers from the game, the storyline mentions that inside the gem lurks an extremely powerful monster. So powerful that even the Demon King would have difficulty dealing with it. Even more noteworthy is that no one in the game ever found a way to hatch this gem or discover its true purpose. Ultimately, this ultra-rare item was only used as a commodity to exchange for cash. Just then, there was a knock on Len's door. Then Lisha gently opened the door, looked in, and said she wanted to chat with him for a moment. The princess noticed that Len was examining the gem again. Len then explained that the item came from Chief Wolven and was brought by his parents when they arrived in Clausel. Because the Sarakia gem is believed to contain an extremely powerful monster, Len decided to keep it, especially since he couldn't destroy the item. Lisha then asked Len how long he would be staying at Clausel. He frankly replied that he planned to leave soon, as his body had recovered quite a bit. Hearing this, Lisha couldn't hide her disappointment and tried to persuade him to stay longer. But Len, being slow-witted, didn't understand what she meant. She mentioned that the Baron had offered him to stay in his current room, but Len had simply replied that he needed to work. This time, Lisha became even more annoyed, and finally bluntly asked him to stay longer. Seeing her sincerity, Len agreed to stay in Clausel for a while longer. During this time, Len and Lisha developed a habit of practicing fencing daily. Occasionally, he would even go shopping with her. He even chose a really nice suit for himself. One day, a royal knight came to visit Clausel. To test Lisha's fencing skills, as this was a rare opportunity, Knight Vios invited Len to participate, since the leader of the Royal Knights would be personally evaluating her. This knight was famous for his fighting style. The Holy Sword technique, founded by the hero Ruin, is a style of swordsmanship that knights typically learn not only basic swordsmanship, but also cultivate a style suited to their individual needs. The Holy Sword technique is one of the most popular styles in this world. Many sword schools utilize it, and mastering a technique can unlock combat skills which are exchanged for magical energy. However, those without innate skills often use sword techniques as an alternative. Len vaguely recalled some techniques from his gaming days, but he doubted he could activate them simply by copying them. Mr. Vios revealed that he focuses on royal swordsmanship, as it doesn't suit the holy sword techniques of the Holy Knights. Len thinks that the royal swordsmanship style suits Vios well because it's a swordsmanship focused on protection. The Sword of Protection. Len expressed his desire to learn royal swordsmanship for Barad's development. Knight Vios was also willing to teach him the style next time. Speaking of which, Len remembered that Lisha Clausel in the game was excellent with the Holy Sword technique. This style is powerful in both defense and offense, and also provides good support, making the user a well-rounded swordsman. In this world, swordsmen are ranked based on strength, and Lisha ranks second with the title of Sword Saint. She was only one rank short of the highest title, Sword King. Sword King is a title given to someone who perfectly combines all styles of swordsmanship. And historically, only 5 people have achieved this position. While discussing swordsmanship, Len asked Mr. Vios if he had ever tried learning other swordsmanship styles. Vios replied that he had studied Gokanki, the great swordsmanship. However, without innate talent, it is very difficult to master it, which explains why only a few people have been able to practice Gokanki. Len recalled Gokanki, a sword technique created by the Lion King, Leomel's ancestor in the game. This was a special technique used only by enemies belonging to the Imperial faction. Swordsmanship and skill are 2 different concepts. In the game, players cannot easily learn them. The technique that Vios is referring to stands out with its excellent offensive and defensive capabilities, but players cannot learn it. Recalling all of this made Len hate those who used Gokanki, because not only were they powerful, but they always guaranteed instant fatal damage. Upon arriving at the stadium, Vios and Len saw Lisha and the Imperial Knights practicing. The princess was delighted to see Len and invited him to join her in training. However, Len indicated that he had come to observe. At this point, a knight from the Imperial Guard spoke up and invited Len to join, saying that he had heard a lot about Len from the princess. According to her, Len possessed promising talent, a fact acknowledged by both the saintess and Vios. Therefore, he wanted to see Len's abilities firsthand, and he gave him the sword. Len agreed, and they began to duel. The knights and princess watched together. After a few moves, the older man urged Len to fight in his own style and stop imitating their techniques. Len was confused. He admitted that he might have incorporated gaming habits, but specifically the sword saint technique, into his current style. When given permission by the man, Len changed his stance and attacked fiercely. The captain of the Imperial Guard showed no signs of worry, though he was inwardly somewhat surprised. He quickly knocked Len out with a single blow, but Len managed to stop him in time. At the last minute, the man attempted to break through Len's defenses, but Len held his position, even under attack. The knight relaxes, and he asked Len's name. Then the knight revealed that the holy sword technique was not suitable for him. Everyone was surprised, especially Lisha. Although Len clearly possesses strength, the knight points out that the issue lies in compatibility, as Len has formed certain habits from training with his father. Len's fighting style is both intense and fierce. However, according to the knight, Len's inherent personality will hinder his ability to learn the sacred sword technique. The good news is that this problem can be remedied, but for Len, it will make it difficult for him to use the sword if he learns the sacred sword technique. The knight couldn't guarantee that Len would master the fighting skills, so it was best for him not to learn this technique, avoiding the development of bad habits. Len readily acknowledged the knight's remark and asked if he could learn just the basics of swordsmanship, to which the knight readily agreed. The training session has ended. When one of the knights asked his commander why he said that to Len, it was because Len couldn't use the holy sword technique. The old knight simply said that he had recognized early on that Len had a talent for a different kind of swordsmanship. Meanwhile, Len and Lisha were chatting in his room. Len asked the princess if she would like to study with the knight captain, and the princess replied that she found it perfectly normal. Len wondered why she had become so irritable in the middle of class, and he pointed out that she had a habit of playing with her hair when she was sad. The princess was surprised because she didn't know she had such a habit, but it turned out Len was just joking. However, her reaction now acknowledges that she was upset earlier. Lisha finally admitted that she had been annoyed by what the knight had said to Len. Len didn't mind too much. At least now he knew better, and wouldn't waste his time and effort learning that technique. Len told her not to worry about him and to focus more on herself. Lisha later shared that the captain of the Knights team pointed out that she had similar habits to Len. Eventually, she relearned his techniques and tactics in order to defeat him. This led her to develop similar habits. Fortunately, the knight said that Lisha's habits could still be corrected. But she didn't like the idea. To her, it was like being told that the goal of defeating Len was wrong. Len advised her to worry about herself instead of him. But Lisha was also happy to learn other sword techniques. She realized she didn't need to try to learn the sacred sword technique. There might be another school of swordsmanship that suited her better. Len remained silent, thinking to himself that he was certain the princess would master the swordsmanship she was learning. At that point, the princess decided to turn the question back to him. If they told you that the techniques your father taught you were unnecessary, would you agree? Len thought for a moment, but before he could answer, Lisha knew they were the same. However, Len points out that he is merely the son of a rural knight, so he is free to learn other sword techniques. Lisha, on the other hand, is the saintess of white. The princess said she was not obligated to comply. Her father had always encouraged her to learn freely and find the path she wanted to take. She also wanted to live freely and become a worthy person in the future, in memory of her late mother. If she starts to change her deeply ingrained habits and finds it difficult to do so, that's when Lisha will feel her time has been wasted. Ultimately, it's better to start learning a different swordsmanship style from scratch, which will help her develop more. Hearing her say that, Len realized that Lisha was an independent person and not just a character in a game. After saying that, he promised to help her find a suitable swordsmanship school. But Lisha corrected her, saying that was their style of swordsmanship.